Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about corporate innovation and entrepreneurship. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you authors, corporate innovation managers, entrepreneurs, and above all else, thought leaders on the topics of innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement. Future Squared brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you successfully navigate your innovation journey. Every Monday, I'll bring you a world-class thought leader such as Steve Blank, Alex Osterwalder, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, or Whitney Johnson, just to name a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you some quick digestible insights myself to help end your week on a high before you head off for the weekend. Future Squared is proudly brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub, school, and consultancy that works with large organizations to help them adopt the mindset, methodologies, and tools required to explore new business models and disruptive innovation in an era of rapid change. If your organization needs support coming up with ideas, testing and turning those ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit Collective Campus online at www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. This episode of Future Squared is brought to you by Spigot, the largest provider of innovation management software to some of the world's foremost companies, including the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Westpac, CSIRO, Westfield, AT&T, Citi, Coca-Cola, MetLife Insurance, Pfizer, Sprint, Unilever, and many more. Spigot has powered innovation and process improvement for large enterprises, enabling them to engage with their employees, customers, and partners to build a culture of innovation. Spigot is recognized by both Gartner and Forrester as the leader in the innovation management sector. For a limited time, listeners of Future Squared can get 10% of Spigot's innovation management platform. Taking advantage of this offer is super easy. Simply sign up for a demo at futuresquared.xyz/Spigot. That's SPIGIT. And now for today's episode. Welcome back to Future Squared, everyone. Today I'll be speaking with Kevin Mulcahy. He's a highly popular speaker on workplace trends, executive coach to senior executives, and curator of insights on shifts in the workplace and workforce for senior HR leaders at Cisco, GE, Microsoft, MasterCard, Qualcomm, and others. He presents globally on the shifts in expectations of employees, the role of new technologies in the workplace, and the changing composition of the workforce. The essence of the insights and wisdom from his own and the experiences of co-author Jeanne Meister are synthesized into the Future Workplace Experience. Kevin co-curates the Future Workplace Network, a membership community for HR executives to come together in person and virtually. Senior HR members gather several times a year to discuss, debate, and share next practices impacting the workplace and workforce of the future and the future of learning, communicating, and working. Most of us have a workplace that is undergoing significant change from how we got our work done previously. Mulcahy is committed to helping talent leaders reimagine and rethink the convergence of the obvious and not so obvious trends reshaping our workplaces and workforces. His career has spanned across various industries as a consultant, researcher, corporate strategist, and company founder and CEO. He's a faculty member at Babson College and an executive coach at the Harvard Business School. So with that, I bring you Kevin Mulcahy. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thank you, Steve. Great to hear from you.
Oh, it's absolutely a pleasure to have you on the program. And before we jump into discussing the future workplace, I know you're a fan of sailing and scuba diving. Have you managed to head out into the waters lately?
Lately, I first became a scuba diver in actually down in Australia on the Great Barrier Reef.
Oh.
I think when you begin there, there's just nowhere to go. So scuba dive in Australia and in Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea.
Oh, fantastic. I guess it's a bit like chasing the dragon. Once you have that first high in the Great Barrier Reef, where do you go from there?
That's right. You've got to go to the furthest remotest. How do you get one better? And you got to go far and wide.
Yeah, fair enough. And we were just joking before I hit the red button that your accent is the culmination of an Irishman spending 20 years living in the USA.
Yes, it's called a mid-Atlantic accent. My father calls me his American son.
I love it. And as an Irishman, you would have caught the Conor McGregor fight in the UFC over the weekend?
Didn't catch the fight, but I caught the replays. Next 50 replays.
Yes. It would be pretty hard not to catch at least one of the 50 replays, seeing as it was plastered all over pretty much every media outlet, even the ones that have absolutely nothing to do with sport. But anyways.
What they call green Twitter, right? Which is where every Irish victory is broadcast on the internet.
Of course. Just like you were saying, when the Irish cricket team beats New Zealand or England or whoever it is, suddenly everyone's a cricket fan.
Absolutely. Love the taste of victory.
Of course we do. Okay, Kevin, so we could talk sport all day, I'm sure, but we've got more pressing matters to talk about today, and that is the release of your first book, which you co-wrote with Jeanne Meister, called The Future Workplace, 10 Rules for Mastering Disruption in Recruiting and Engaging Employees. Can you perhaps start by giving us a little bit of info on your background and how you came to write a book on the future workplace?
Absolutely. My research background comes from the management consulting world, actually. So seeing business problems and challenges through the eyes of the senior executive suite, and subsequently left consulting to join a market intelligence firm, which is really, and actually it was a competitive intelligence firm. And the very definition of intelligence is how do you make decisions, right? The definition of intelligence is gathering data to make decisions. And if you're gathering data and not making decisions, then it's really not intelligence gathering. And so when you take a view on analyzing any industry or any function or any environment, and you ask yourself, well, what are the decisions that have to be made, and work backwards from there, then that's really the angle that we approach the analysis of what are the trends that are driving the changes in the future workplace, and what decisions have companies recently made to change and incorporate. Because we can have opinions all evening long, but whenever you can identify what has triggered a behavioral change, those trends that have triggered behavioral change are the trends that companies are actually banking their money on versus banking their opinions on. We have to always pay attention to those.
Sure. So what are some of the key trends you've identified then, Kevin?
Well, there was three broad trends. One was a mega shift in what workers expect from work. Right? It's the workplace has evolved quite significantly for employees and what they expect to get out of it from 5 years ago. And the key trend that we found within that dimension was really that work needs to be a lot more experiential, and I can dig into these pillars in a moment. The second broad trend was how technology is transforming the workplace.
Yes.
In fact, 1/3 of our book is very much focused on the different implications of how technology changes internally the dynamics of the workplace. The third is the changing composition of the workforce itself, and from the 5 generations in the workplace to the more the increasing role of women in the workplace, and most interestingly, the participants from the gig economy starting to enter into the workplace. Yeah.
So you've touched on quite a few points there. I guess just in order, it might be worthwhile touching on those pillars, the pillars around expectations of employees.
Yeah, so the first expectation is really about making work has to be experiential. And by experiential, we mean that work has now become has to be consumer grade. Every employee is a consumer in their outside work life, and the bar that people have for experience of dealing with providers is pretty high. We identified a number of aspects that drive experience. One is, what is the emotional experience of work here? Meaning, what is the why for why am I here at this role? And what is the why for the company? Why is the company doing what it's doing? Whose needs is it really solving? not just to do the job that I'm in, but to help me with the job that I'm going to get after this company. Thirdly is the physical space. Is this an acceptable workspace to work in? The great cube era is gone, and if it's not a cool space with that feels as comfortable as home, I'm not coming to the office. Work technology. It had better work. It's not about the coolest technology. It's about the best working technology. And lastly, cultural. What are the values that this company holds and how we do things around here? And I'm a lot less tolerant if how we behave and how we do things around here don't match my expectations.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I guess today there's a lot of rhetoric out there about customer experience, but perhaps not enough on employee experience. And actually reminds me of one of my early guests on the podcast, David Burkus, who wrote a book called Under New Management, in which he stressed that companies shouldn't have a customer-first culture, but an employee-first culture, because if you've got happy, engaged employees performing at their best, that's likely to reflect on the ultimate customer experience.
Absolutely, and that is the actual essence of what our book is getting at. And it's really a book targeted to hiring managers and HR leaders, and trying to think about every way in which the company, or which the employee experiences the company. It's no point in saying, well, we in HR are doing everything we can, or we in personnel management, or we in real estate, or we in IT. It has to be looked at holistically on every interaction that the company has with the employee is an opportunity to improve.
Yeah.
The other key point I'll make here is you don't fix what's broken. A lot of people fall into the trap of, well, let's go fix what's the worst experience. You fix what's broken, you bring yourself up to par at best.
Yeah.
Improve what can be improved and take average experiences and make them amazing experiences.
And I guess, if I was to draw from, design thinking processes where you perform customer journey mapping, would you perform a similar sort of exercise for employees where you track every touch point that an employee has with the company and how you can make those touch points better?
Absolutely. The core premise of design thinking is actually around the principle of observing and identifying needs. And there was a great concept I read in one of the design thinking books about the concept of Buja Day. And Buja Day is the opposite of deja vu, where we feel that we've seen it before. Buja Day is seeing what we've seen 1,000 times before, but seeing it differently and going, I know how to change that.
Yeah.
I know how to improve that.
Right.
So design thinking is fundamentally designed around needs. And what's happening now is companies are actually paying attention and trying to get a lot more creative in actually figuring out, observing, and listening to what the employees say their needs are, rather than trying to decide what those needs are and implement policies based on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess it's about moving from a culture of, well, that's the way we've always done things around here, to Vuja Day, where you may have seen things done a million times a certain way, but let's change that for the better.
Absolutely. Or we don't necessarily know that it's going to be for the better. Just change it and see what happens.
Yeah, good point.
There's got to be an experimental mindset of let's change, see what happens, get some feedback, and then reiterate again and again. It's very much an experimental mindset rather than we have one answer and let's roll out that one answer to everybody mindset.
Yeah. And I guess a company has to be open to running these experiments and having them perhaps not add value or even take value away, but ultimately you're going to learn something and you're going to, like you said, iterate towards slowly but surely improving the employee experience.
Well, I think you just put your finger on a really key concept there, and that's the attitude towards experimentation. If we become better experimenters rather than trying to make sure that everything is a success, in the world of experimentation, any result is a success. And we've become programmed in the business world to think of business cases, and there has to be guaranteed successes or somebody's head is going to roll. And in the world of innovation, you experiment and try things, and then you have to basically have a culture that says, whether it succeeds or not was not the point. We're going to celebrate and debrief on the failures as much as we'll celebrate the successes, because what we're ultimately celebrating is you went out, good on you, and you tried something different and you tried something new. And it's only by doing that and having a culture of trying new things, not every one of which is going to succeed, we get the breakthroughs that really matter.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I guess when you're running an experiment, while any result is successful if for the purposes of running the experiment and getting your learning, ultimately you want to have some sort of indication as to where we are today in terms of some sort of a number, or it could be a net promoter score based on customer experience, and perhaps where we want to get to tomorrow. And then you can run your experiment and you might see that, hey, this metric has not improved at all. In fact, it's gone backwards, but here's the learning. Let's share this with the organization and optimize, I guess, our return on failure, if you will.
Absolutely. And actually, that would be a great new metric to introduce. So people are listening and want to give you ideas on. The metric is return on failure. How would you measure that? What is the underlying measurement that we want to make? And some people would say it's the number of new things that we've tried, and the cumulative results at the end of the year from all the things that we've worked over all the expense of the things that we've tried. So I think that's a great metric, is return on failure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, there's no point experimenting, failing, and keeping that to yourself, and then ultimately someone else in the organization runs the same experiment and fails, again, doing the exact same thing because they weren't aware of your experiments. Or ultimately, like you said, iteration is one way to move us from failure to success, and unless the entire organization has a view of what experiments were run previously, they've got nothing to build upon.
Absolutely.
So the book, Kevin, touches on touches on recruitment and engaging employees. So I guess I'm keen to speak to you a little bit more about recruitment and doing what Jim Collins from Good to Great calls getting the right people on the bus. So how is recruiting people changing for the future workplace, and what should large organizations in particular be thinking about?
Oh, excellent. So we have a framework to rethink recruiting in 5 different stages. And number 1 is this concept of intentionally building an employer brand. And I think what companies' leadership has to think about is we spend all of our marketing dollars branding our business in the eyes of the people who buy from our business. How much marketing dollars are we spending building our brand in the eyes of the people who want to work here?
Yeah.
And your brand as an employer is rather different than your brand as a buyer.
Yeah.
Right? The second one is really on, are there opportunities to get early insights into candidates, to vet them ahead of time? And we're seeing a number of companies now training on testing candidates before they employ them. That can be through predictive analytics or having them do the old aptitude tests. But more and more we're seeing that companies are actually taking the time to structure an assignment and give employees an assignment and pay them for doing that assignment and seeing how well they do these assignments. It's especially easy in a internet world where many assignments can be done remotely. Thirdly, using smart resourcing or smart sourcing to gather resources. In the employee world, we often sit and wait for employees or candidates to apply to us. And what we're seeing now is a number of companies are actually proactively going out, using LinkedIn, and targeting the types of employees that they might want to work for them, and are segmenting those potential employees and really identifying that if that employee actually follows companies like ours, or if that company is connected to people who work within our company, there's almost a 4 times better chance that if we can engage those types of people in the recruiting process, they're much more likely to actually end up accepting an offer and fitting into the culture. And fourthly, one of the old chestnuts is tapping employees for referrals. And companies have a very haphazard way of tapping for referrals. It's usually put out a bounty there. Great, we'll pay you X amount of dollars for referring a friend, and we'll only pay you if that person gets through the arduous recruitment process, and only if they stay 6 months. Well, that's not really promoting a very good quality referral chain. It has to be really taught much more differently as a much more systematic way of promoting referrals. And if you actually give a bounty on referrals, so they turn out to be good or bad, and pay immediately, you'll get a lot more referrals. And lastly, I think we're all employers are guilty of this in some way, shape, or form. It's the infamous black hole of what happens to my application when it goes to the employer. And really, there's a move now towards being a lot more transparent, especially with applicant tracking systems, and in letting the employee know what the status of their application is as it goes, right? Think of it as like, if I can track a FedEx around the world in 48 hours, why can I not track a resume into the bowels of our organization?
Yeah.
Those are the 5 things that we think about there that are changing the recruiting ecosystem.
Yeah. And you touched on a few great points there. And on the black hole of applications, you mentioned tracking. And I recently interviewed Eric Armquist, who wrote an article for Harvard Business Review on the 30 elements of value. And he basically concluded that companies who have, say, 5 or more of these elements of value in their products have a much higher net promoter score. And one of those elements was, in fact, tracking. So whether it's customer facing or employee facing, just having that, or in this case candidate facing, just having some form of tracking is just going to radically improve someone's experience, interactions with your brand, with your product, and therefore I suppose their perceptions of your company are just going to be much, much greater than what they would be if it was just that black hole and you never hear back.
Absolutely. And the essence of the Net Promoter Score is, would you recommend a friend or family to, quote unquote, buy this product? Well, in the HR world, it is, would you recommend a friend or family member to apply to this company? And so we're seeing companies actually come at that Net Promoter Score a little differently. And some questions to test candidate perceptions have been, if you had 30 seconds to sell your friends on why they should work for our company, what would they say? Like any one of your listeners could ask any one of your employees that question, and you get an instant sort of essence of what is it that they would say about working for you. Or another one you could say is, what programs or support could our company provide to help you build your career here?
Yeah.
Or just essentially what we're not doing with employees is we're not doing enough asking. But at the end of the day, the annual engagement surveys of once a year, quick poll, answer the 40 questions, we'll add it up, and 18 months later we'll tell you what you taught 12 months ago, right?
Yeah.
It's not working.
Yeah, that's not working, and neither is the traditional employee performance review process, which is often once a year tick and flick sort of exercise to keep learning and development or human resources satisfied, but ultimately doesn't deliver that employee with much ongoing feedback to help them get the most out of their year with that organization and develop as a professional and as a person as well.
And that's the ultimate role of a performance review. It's really a performance review is to provide the employee with the recognition, the reward, and the feedback that they actually deserve. And employee performance review are generally traditionally not working as advertised. And now what we're seeing is a move from dropping, and I think you called it tick and flick, which is I love that. I'm going to repeat that one to others. And really at the end of the day, it has to provide timely and actionable feedback to employees, helping how you can be a better contributor to the business and really recognizing how they have made great contributions to the business. And we're seeing a lot of companies replace this with much more frequent check-ins, open conversations on those two dimensions. And it is becoming a less of a tick and flick and more of a, look, what is it that, here's how you're doing, here's how you need to do better, here's where you're doing great, and let's try to focus on these things until we talk next.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a move within some organizations towards what you've alluded to there, which is not necessarily, as I say, a tick and flick, but more of a casual monthly conversation with an employee. A very open, transparent conversation that oftentimes isn't recorded anywhere, but just gives that person the timely, relevant feedback they need to keep improving.
Yeah, and actually there was a great moment of truth at a company I heard recently, which is when I say that young Kevin isn't performing, and I call HR and I say, listen, I think young Kevin isn't performing here. The modern company, instead of saying, well, okay, we'll have a word with Kevin and see what his challenge is, they're going, let's have a word with Steve, his manager, and see if Steve actually laid out Kevin's goals and objectives as clearly as he should.
Yeah.
So HR organizations where the instinct is to call the manager and assume that the manager probably miscommunicated the goals and objectives versus the current instinct of let's call the employee because the manager obviously clearly explained everything. All of our managers traditionally have.
Of course.
So it must be the employee's fault. That's the actual moment of truth, is who do we call first when we hear that there's a performance challenge. And now those that are hitting it out of the park are the ones who call the manager first and say, let me hear what expectations you set out for the employee, and what they're finding is employees are doing what's expected and the expectations are poor.
Yeah, and I guess with any sort of goals and objectives, we also need to have some sort of actionable roadmap. I mean, what's going to help me reach this goal rather than just saying, okay, this is your goal for the next 3 to 6 to 12 months, whatever the case is, now go off and achieve it, but not being given any sort of roadmap forward.
Yeah, and actually it does require a tremendous retraining of frontline managers in how to actually help their employees provide what you were calling actionable steps on how to improve. And the old, the structure that we've been used to, that ticking and flicking, has dumbed down the performance review that managers don't actually have to seriously think about identifying 2 or 3 actions for their employees specifically and think hard about it. And I think that's what's beginning to happen now, is people are getting a lot better trained in how to provide some and co-identify and co-create some actions together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess, I mean, we're talking about this from the perspective of our existing employees, but are you seeing any sort of shift, given all the changes that are happening in our economy, particularly around technology, things are moving faster than ever. Are you seeing a shift in the type of skills, the type of mentality that progressive companies are employing?
Absolutely. If there's one trait that makes a fantastic employee, I'll lay it out right now what the research has yielded. It is, are you a learner?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're not a learner and you can't demonstrate that you're a learner, no matter what age you are, then you are not part of the future runway of the company.
Yeah.
And any employee, if they're a learner, as the company's market evolves and as the company needs structure evolves, if you are teachable, then I can constantly help you upgrade and modify and help you keep your skills relevant and current. But if you're not a learner, you atrophy and you have a limited shelf life, and I have no choice but to to remove you.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess going back 20 or 30 years, if you had a particular skill set, you could more or less rely on that skill set for the majority of your career. But today, with things moving as quickly as they are, the need to be constantly learning and adapting is greater than ever. And therefore, like you said, you're going to have a very, very short shelf life if you're relying purely on your existing skill set.
Well, and also, to take your thought just one step further there, I'm relying on your existing skill set, but then I'm also over-relying on the certifications that you've gathered to improve your skill set. And we see employers have traditionally been reluctant to, for example, take non-traditional candidates who may not have a college degree and put them into a position that traditionally has required a college degree, and they've ignored completely other signs of this employee being a learner, right? So a lot of folks are now self-teaching themselves. They're using the internet. They're taking online, massive, open courses or MOOCs, online courses. And if you see signs that somebody is, we used to think of it as a bad thing before, where people took a whole series of courses and never finished them and never got the certification. Well, that mindset now, that Bujade mindset of seeing it differently, is that somebody that's attempting to learn and attempting to try new things. They may not have found what they want to master yet, but at least they're showing the intent to learn.
Yeah.
In the end of the day, putting a chip on that person who's attempting to learn versus the one who just did one thing and got certified in it, I think that person who's attempting to learn will be a better long-term employee at the business chain. That's a radical revisiting of some common wisdom there.
And you touched on some interesting points there, such as, obviously, when you're hiring for people who are learners, that's something that we see that's something that's quite prevalent in Silicon Valley, where people are hired for attitude first and skills second. And, they tend to be hiring T-shaped individuals who might be really great at one thing, but are just generalists across a wide range of areas, because the need to collaborate with people from, from design, from your web development team, from marketing, from finance is greater than ever. No longer are companies able to rely purely on operating in a silo sort of environment.
Absolutely, and I'll even go one step further on the learner concept. To truly learn something, and to prove that I've learned it, often a great sign is, well, could this person teach it?
Yeah.
And now we see a lot of peer-to-peer teaching. Anybody who's made a YouTube and posted it up on a how-to and posted it for anybody else to figure out, I don't care if it's to program your new iPhone or to, here's how to put on your scuba mask.
Yeah.
Anybody who has the orientation to teach somebody, a fellow employee, or just anybody on the internet something, if you are a teacher, then you are a learner. And that's the other subtle signal now that companies are looking for is, give me an example of when you've taught somebody something.
Yeah.
The people who do that, who teach other people something, are the types of people I want in my team. Our business environment is changing, and those that can quickly figure out new skills and then teach other people new skills are the people I want on my team.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we've actually got a company here in Australia called Peer Academy who do a similar thing, where it's all about empowering employees to teach colleagues topics that they excel at, or at least not even excel at, but have learned something and are in a position to at least give their colleagues the foundational learning as well, and therefore reinforce their own learning and consolidate their own skills. And I guess on that, given that the need to be more adaptable and learn quicker in this changing environment is more important than ever, many large organizations still have that sort of reliance to defer to certifications. If it's certified, then it's good enough. If it's not certified, then it doesn't really count. And the reality of the matter is, with many bodies today who certify learning, you need to jump through a lot of hoops to get particular content certified, and it takes a long time. And if you're wanting to release current, up-to-date, relevant material, chances are you can do a better job if you're not certified. So what's your advice for companies that, I suppose, are looking purely for certifications?
Well, I'd say keep hiring accountants and lawyers,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Because that's where it matters. But if you're looking for creative people who are going to help you deal with what they call the VUCA world,
Mm.
the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous
Ah.
world, you want people who are able to demonstrate that they are learners and that they're able to pivot and pick up new things. And right now we're seeing, especially in younger generations, there used to be a heavy emphasis on completion because that's what others expected.
Mm-hmm.
But now people are picking up and reading half a book because that's all they wanted to read,
Mm.
right? And that's all they needed to read. They're watching a few YouTube videos because that's all they just got. They got the knowledge that they needed, and they've moved on.
Mm.
I think what you've got to look at now is the frequency of which people pick up and try to learn new things versus measuring the duration and distance. It's almost like you want the sprinters, not the marathoners.
Mm.
You want to mix of both. And we keep hiring learning marathoners, and on the presumption that the one who's completed the most is the better employee. And actually, in a volatile and fast-changing environment, you almost now need the ones who can learn in short bursts,
Mm-hmm.
can really turn their attention to learn something different pretty quickly,
Yeah.
and aren't over-attached on completing one thing. Because we say, look, that the environment has shifted. I need you to now learn this, learn that, learn the other.
Yeah. And the amount of books I've read, that were, say, 200, 300 pages long that could have been summarized in 20 pages. I'd say 70% of business books I've read probably fall into that category. And ultimately, a publisher's not going to publish a book and charge $30 for it if it's only 30 pages long. So they need to cram a little bit more content into these books. But there's nothing wrong with opening a book, pulling out the key concepts, and then applying that or teaching someone else those key concepts in order to reinforce that skill set, rather than saying, okay, I opened this book, I've read the first few pages, and therefore I need to read the next 293.
Actually, your question there, if you ask two questions, if you say, well, what's the last book you've read? And then I ask you, what's the last book you actually fully completed?
Mm-hmm.
You might give me two different answers, because by just how you explained it there, our definition of what reading a book means, saying, yes, I bought it, I read 4, 5, or 6 chapters out of the 12 to get the gist of it, I am now declaring that I've read it, and you are accepting that, yeah, sounds like he's read it. What I'm not saying is I completed it cover to cover and read it cover to cover. In fact, in our own book, the Future Workplace Experience, we actually wrote it modularly that way, so anybody could read any chapter, and our presumption was that very few people will actually read the full book. Those who are interested in recruiting will read a chapter in recruiting. Those who are interested in learning will read the chapter in learning. Those who are interested in a chapter in the gig economy will read the chapter in the gig economy, and they'll get their $20 value from the chapter or two and the insight or two, rather than I want to read the whole book and get my value that way.
Yeah.
That's not the new model anymore.
Yeah. And speaking of the new model, Kevin, do you have any examples of companies that are doing this well in terms of building their brand, creating an environment where they're constantly developing their employees, they've got a cool, fun environment, technology works, there is a clear purpose, and people just love working for the organization?
Airbnb would be one who's done it really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
And the head of, I'll call it human capital there, is called the Chief Employee Experience Officer.
Right.
So let me just peel that back a little bit. If I said to you tomorrow morning, Steve, your job is to be head of HR, or if I said to you your job is to be Chief Employee Experience Officer, you're going to set out and do two different things just based on the 4-word title I gave you. Right? In the first case, as head of HR, you're going to go round up all the policies. In the second case, you're going to round up all the, well, I better check to see what experience is working and not working in my firm. So even just, and there's an analogy that at LinkedIn, you asked about companies that are doing it well. LinkedIn has a corporate philosopher on the staff who at new employee training does a course and does a little exercise with them called What is Your Job? Mm-hmm. Ask this of every employee. And essentially the giveaway is they often define their job as a description of the function they perform. And the insight that people leave the workshop with is, no, your job is the same as everybody else's, to help our company win in the marketplace.
Right.
That's your job. And the fact that you just happen to be doing this role right now is how you're helping the company win in the marketplace. So that's an example of a company that's doing it, another company that's doing it right by the mindset of what is your job, number one, or with Airbnb, the mindset of what is the role of the Chief Employee Experience Officer. And once you think about every interaction being additive to the experience of the employee, you start reinventing and changing every way in which the employee interacts with the company. Again, it's important to emphasize here, you don't fix what's broke. That only gets you up to par. It's about if this is any aspect of the HR process, could it be appified, meaning is there an app for that? Could it be made simpler? Could it be improved? Doesn't matter whether it's broken. Anything that can be improved and you invest and improve it would improve the employee experience. And at the very beginning of our conversation, we talked about the shift in expectations. It's not solving it because Facebook solved something. Mm-hmm. It's basically listening to asking your employees, what would it improve the experience of working here? What can we do in this town, at this time, in this company, and believing what they say and addressing that. What do you think? It's worthwhile or not? It's not your point of view. It's listening and believing what your employees say would improve the experience and implementing that.
Yeah.
And so I think, I want to caution people on just because a big famous American Silicon Valley company had this checklist of 20 things that they did really well that will work in Brisbane. No. It won't. It will fail miserably in Brisbane. It's the employees in Brisbane or Adelaide may have other things that they say will improve the experience there, and that's what you then need to do.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, we have so many instances where cities around the world are purporting to build their own Silicon Valley, and they head over to Silicon Valley and try and get some insights and bring them back to their corners of the globe. But the realities for every organization are different. And you've got different cultures to contend with, different geographical issues, and just thinking because something works in the valley or for a particular company over there is going to work for you is pretty disjointed thinking.
Absolutely. And every company that's implemented these successful programs, they're doing it to appeal to a particular, it's just like the marketing strategy. They're doing it to appeal to a particular segment of employees in a particular environment for particular reasons, against other competitors for that same segment of employees.
Yeah.
So that's why what all of these are designed for. So when you hear a company that's doing something cool, you say, well, why are they doing that? Who are they competing against? And I'll give you something counterintuitive. Amway is a global firm that's probably operating in Australia quite successfully. Amway's competition is actually Etsy and Amazon. And why that is because if you're the type of person that wants to start their own business under the tutelage of a franchise brand like Amway and have a work-from-home business, then the alternative is opening your own store on Amazon or opening your own store on Etsy and doing it that way. And so the competition for the talent talent is actually very different than what we think it is. And so each company has to basically ask itself, who are we, if they don't work here, where else are they going to work? And you analyze it back to the old strategy of the last 50 people that left our firm, where did they go to work? Because your competition is actually who's actually taking your competitor, your employees. And of the last 50 people we hired, from which companies did we take them?
Yeah.
And that's the pool. And if you are meeting the expectations of your employees differently and better than the companies that are taking employees from you, you started out by saying recruiting and retaining. Now we've moved to the retention side. That's how you will retain. Know who you're competing for in talent and fight the competition that's real, and stop fighting the imaginary competitor in your head.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Competing against Facebook.
Yes, exactly right. And, I think I draw some similarities between that concept and the Clayton Christensen's jobs to be done concept, where you might have a particular product and just say the product is, say, designer jeans. You might think that your competitors are just other forms of jean manufacturers. But in reality, your customer, the job to be done in any given circumstance might be that, hey, I've had a bad week at work, so I want to go out and engage in some retail therapy. I might not necessarily buy an expensive pair of jeans. I might buy something else, or I might go out, hit a bar and have some drinks to drown my sorrows. There could be many other things that you're competing with in that moment of time. So your competitors, whether it's a product, whether it's who's competing for your employees' engagement, retention, or your employees' basically hours, may not always be as obvious as you think. It might not be as simple as 10 ways Facebook has the best workplace in the world, because there's a lot of blogs out there that try to essentially give us a silver bullet in terms of what's going to work for our organizations. But the fact is that every organization has its own set of unique circumstances, both internal and external, that determine what's going to work best for it.
And the employees generally know the answers. Now, you've done something, and I just want to highlight this in the course of our conversation.
Sure.
You've done something that I want to highlight, in the sense that you've referenced several books with several concepts that are actually not written for talent, and you've made them about talent. So I want to underline that for the listeners to say, what you're doing is exactly how HR folks and talent leaders need to think. As you hear about a marketing concept, just ask yourself the question, how would that same concept, how would we apply it to the talent function? So any cool business book or business concept that you read that's written for a particular purpose, let's call it the recruiter of the future, the leader of talent of the future, joins the dots and says, how do we take that very same concept and apply it to HR? And so that's where, the employee experience literature, that those articles came out in the 1990s. Sorry, the customer experience literature all came out in the 1990s. And it's only now that we're calling it the employee experience. Design thinking came out, a decade ago, but now we're seeing the emergence of HR hackathons and design thinking to improve HR practices.
Yeah.
So the one truism that I can underline for your listeners is whatever management concept you are hearing that is designed for another function, it will eventually show up and apply it to people. So why not jump ahead of that? The next management concept you hear about, say, how would we apply that to people instead of whatever it's being applied to? Well done on that one.
Oh, cheers, Kevin. And cheers. I think that's essentially what you're talking about there. I think McKinsey calls Horizon 2 adjacent innovation, which again is taking a different concept and applying it to talent here. But that is where you take, say, innovations, whether they're business model innovation or technology innovation, that are applied to a different, say, industry, and applying it to your own, similar to what Uber has done recently with Uber Eats. They've seen all the food delivery startups, but then they've taken their own technology and applied it. And so what you're getting there is not necessarily breakthrough, disruptive innovation that's never been done before, but it's taking novel ways that other industries are doing certain things and then applying them in your own to get to a certain outcome.
Exactly. Innovation is not necessarily doing something that's new to the world. It's just about doing something that's new to your space.
Exactly.
And I think that the fastest way to be innovative is to be a quick adapter of seeing something in one area and bringing it quickly into another area. And that's the definition of innovation.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And one of the final points I wanted to touch on, Kevin, you mentioned when employees are asked what their role is, ultimately their role is to help the company win. It's about aligning that goal. So, in today's workplace, we might have Gen Ys working next to baby boomers, working next to Gen Xers. How important is it to tap the power of multiple generations, and how do we best do that?
That's an excellent question. Traditionally, companies have basically been focusing on the newest generation that has come into the workplace and helping all the existing generations understand the new generation. And frankly, after 15, 16, 17 years about hearing about millennials, a lot of employees have millennial fatigue. And so what we're seeing with companies now is that they've stopped doing generational training, and they're calling it now, they've broadened it up to inclusiveness training, which bottom line is we're all different, whether we have essentially age as a mindset, and just because you're a certain age doesn't mean that you hold a certain set of behaviors just because 90% of people in your age group do. We're all different, and we all owe it as to be members of this team. We all owe it to understand where each of us is coming from and to understand what are our common goals, what's our job here, and where are we different, and how do we use those differences to help the company win. And so it's moving from being labeling and categorizing you and boxing you in by your generation to now basically saying, what are the attitudes that you hold, what are the attitudes that I hold, and let's talk about how we can leverage our differences and recognize our commonalities and get things done as a team. Because I have 80-year-old aunts on Facebook, and I know 24-year-olds who don't use Facebook.
Yeah, exactly right. And you can't essentially attribute an entire generation based on certain variables. It doesn't hold true for the entire pool of people.
And I also just want to emphasize one other thing. The function in the U.S. is called diversity and inclusion. And sometimes we mistake, or we use diversity is how different everybody is. So we'll have our token representatives of certain generations. But the inclusion is often what is missed. The inclusion is basically, if you went to the trouble of getting people who are different in, then inclusion is actually listening to them and including them in the conversations, including them in the decisions, and believing what it is they say and making sure that they are heard. Because what we're seeing now is those minority points of view, meaning they're the points of view held by the fewest amount of people, usually the smallest group or the newest group, are actually the seeds of where the future is going. And so we have to say, let's make sure we have a range of ages represented here, but also let's make sure that we're actually listening to who those different people are and trying to act on what each of these groups say. And it goes back to the experiment. And test, not make big investments based on what people say. How would we conduct an experiment to test if what they're saying might in fact be a good solution? And spend a little money showing people that you've heard them and you're willing to try things based on what they've said, and people will get very focused next time round on making sure that they're getting a lot more specific in the recommendations that they're making and how to, what you can do to be more engaging, etc., etc.
Yeah. No, makes a lot of sense. And look, in the interests of time, Kevin, I think we might have to just jump into our lightning round. Are you ready to answer 3 quick questions?
Oh, I'd love to.
Let's do this. So, if you could work for any company at any stage of the company lifecycle, Kevin, who would it be and why?
I would work for Airbnb because they are the ones that I think totally get the concept that every part of the company is an experience for the employee as well as for their customers.
Love it. Great answer. And question number 2 is, if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask?
Who would it be? I need to go. I need to go for a leadership question here. So I need to be. I need to go back to, I think, the founder of Ford, and really ask what that link of he fundamentally got at was that his employees were consumers also, and he built a company in the early days balancing the recognition that it has to work and you have to compensate and pay employees enough that they're able to also consume product. And I think now we're in a world where we, as employers, are really trying to underpay employees and are actually hurting our economy by not giving people a fair wage. So I want to understand that equation of a bit more from the founder of Ford.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And the lucky last question, Kevin. I like to deep dive into the minds of high performers, and as somebody who has been a consultant, researcher, corporate strategist, founded your own company, a faculty member at Babson College, and an executive coach at the Harvard Business School, keen to find out whether or not you have any rituals or routines to help you stay on top of your game.
I think it's dividing everything into 2 questions. Is what do I need to do this week to get results? Because without results, we're nothing. And the second one is, what do I need to do to engage and build my relationships with others? Because without others, we're nothing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people's to-do list is overly focused on results or also overly focused on relationship, and you have to really balance. It's about the results, and it's about it's about how you work with others or play nicely to get those results. And try to keep that as a balanced list.
Great. That's a fantastic answer. Well, thank you so much for your insights today, Kevin. Where can our audience go to find out a little bit more about yourself and pick up a copy of the book?
Yes, you can go to our book's website, thefutureworkplaceexperience.com, and there we lay out what the book is about, the wonderful people who endorsed us, and many different ways in which you can buy the book online or physically delivered down to you in Australia.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Kevin, for joining us on Future Squared. Hope you enjoy what little is left of your Sunday nights, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Fantastic. It was a complete pleasure to speak with you, Steve.
Hey guys, it's Steve again. If you're picking up what we're putting down, we'd love it if you took just a minute of your time to like, share, or subscribe to Future Squared on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. It would mean a hell of a lot to the team here who work effortlessly to bring you thought leaders and experts on topics of corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement on a weekly basis. As always, you can find more resources on innovation, including blogs, books, podcasts, videos, webinars, and tools at www.collectivecamp.us. If you'd like to connect with me on Twitter, you can do so at Steve Glaveski. That's Glaveski. Until next time, keep innovating. Future Squared out.